Here we go. Because our soul on its own, it doesn't need to come to this world. Our soul is flawless. Our soul is perfect. It's a piece of God, like we said in chapter 2. Nefesh Hashenis, the second soul, is a chelek eloka mimal mamish, is literally a piece of God that he breathed into us. But it's for our animal soul, for our body, for the world, the sparks in the world. We have to elevate that. That's why we're here. So it lifts us up to a higher place that on its own we would not be able to reach. Cheryl, good question. What page are we on? I leave that up to Robin. So I think we're on 414. Robin, would you agree to that?
I missed last week, so I don't know.
You missed last week. Robin, what are we going to do? I think we're on 414.
Oh,
we're going to start on section 3. Vivian, are you in agreement to that? Okay, good. Vivian's in agreement, and we are good. Judaism is a non-dualistic religion. So what does Satan mean to Yiddishkeit? So interesting question. Satan took on different terminologies throughout different times of history. Originally, the Satan was the serpent. And at later times, it's the Yetzer Hara. Depending on what era, it had to take on a different title because it got exposed. When it's exposed, the game is up. So it always needs to come up with a different disguise. In fact, in our generation, going back from the Mittler Rebbe, the second Chabad Rebbe, he says that in his generation, I don't know if it got more advanced since then or progressed since then, but he says in our generation, the Satan of our day is our ego. That is the Satan that we deal with. It's disguised as an ego, but it's the same Satan that was the serpent, that's the Yetzer Hara, that tempted us to sin with the golden calf and tempted us to sin with idolatry. It's the same thing. It just takes on different aliases as it gets exposed and its game is up. But definitely there is that other side, as we're learning in Tanya, the Yetzer Hara, the animal soul, the idea to keep it in balance and to give us the freedom of choice. So Satan has to do its job. It's only doing the will of God, which wants to challenge us. Yes, Lynn.
Yes, 2 weeks ago, I was teaching some students in a Polish seminary school, and we were studying through the wisdom books, and we were on the book of Job. And what was interesting, I was explaining Hasatan, just exactly what you were saying, how it morphs over time, and it's really it's a title, the accuser, and it accuses our soul. And right when I was explaining what the accuser does, I'm teaching in Oregon to people all over in Eastern Europe, and wow. I lose my connection, and it's being translated simultaneously in Polish and Russian. And so I had to try to get back in, but because the class had already started, there was a code. I had to text the translator, say, could you give me the code? I can't get back in. When I got back in about 5 minutes later, everybody's just sitting there, and the translator said, you smack talk about Hasatan, and he didn't like it. And so we actually said, let's stop and do a blessing and talk about what the goodness of God, Hashem, does in our lives. And let's say he doesn't have to have power over us today.
Nice.
And then we could move on with the class, but everybody's just sitting there waiting for me to come back, because it's like I had just spoken about Hasatan, kind of like the good stuff, and he broke the connection.
Wow. I like that. Wow. And I don't have a pen next to me, so I can't write this down. I'm going to send you after class. One of the rabbis that is from Montreal that I knew growing up, his name is Rabbi Moshe Nu, and he runs a Chabad in Montreal that's very, very prominent. It's called the Montreal Torah Center. Actually, a few years ago, it's pretty nice because I grew up in that synagogue. And a few years ago, they invited me to be the guest speaker to that community in Montreal for the 10th of Shvat, which is in January, which marks the day that our Rebbe became the Rebbe. So it was nice to go back there. But what I wanted to bring out is there's a 7 or 8 minute clip of Rabbi Moshe Nu sharing the story of the Satan that I just told you briefly in like 30 seconds. So if I remember after the class, God willing, I will share that with you. And you know what? I think it's been a while since I shared you. If you've missed any classes, I'll just put out an email with the most recent Tanya classes. That way, in case you're driving over Thanksgiving and you want to just listen to it as an audio safely, you would be able to do that. Okay, thank you. So my point is that the Tanya today marks the day that the Tanya was printed for the very first time in the year 1796. So it itself is a very special time. And I do want to encourage, at your own pace, we're studying the Tanya. It's taking us a couple of years and we're making good progress, but there is a cycle to actually study the Tanya in the course of a year. So we start today and it ends next year by the 19th of Kislev. There's a podcast. I don't know if you're into podcasts, either Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts. There's Rabbi Josh Gordon of blessed memory. He goes through the Tanya. It takes probably somewhere between 8 to 15 minutes a day. And you can listen to it on 2-speed if you want to listen to it a little quicker. So it could take you literally tops of 10 minutes. And he goes through a daily section of the Tanya that would conclude it by next year. And he's a great teacher. I knew him personally. Unfortunately, he passed away. He was a rabbi, Chabad rabbi in the Valley, in San Fernando Valley of LA. And he's a great teacher. So you can listen to his Tanya. And just to explain that to you a little more, in our custom, we have a tradition from the Alter Rebbe to study every day a section of the Tanya, a section of the Chumash, of the weekly Torah portion, and a section of Tehillim, that we finish the Tehillim in the cycle of a month, a daily section. We finish the Torah in the cycle of the year, finishing on Simchas Torah, and we finish the Tanya in the cycle of the year, finishing on 19th of Kislev, which God willing we'll do next year. So if you put those three daily study together, you have Chumash, Tehillim, and Tanya. It comes up with the word chitas, chitat. Chumash is a chet, Tehillim has a taf, and Tanya also is a taf. Together it's chitat. And in last week's Torah portion, it says, Vayhi chitat Elokim, that when Jacob was traveling through the land, he was worried maybe there's going to be anti-Semitism around him, maybe there's going to be the enemies trying to attack. But it says as he's traveled through, there was the fear of the nations upon the Jews. They didn't want to start up with us. So it's brought from the Rebbe's. And so the word chitat is mentioned in the Torah. So it's brought from the Rebbe's that when we do our part of studying a daily section of Chumash, Tehillim, and Tanya, God takes care of us. And there's this aura of radiance and protection and respect from amongst the nation. So it's just a good thing to study. If you want, if you're interested, I could send you the link to his daily study on Chabad.org. It's also now as a podcast. And okay, with that, we will begin inside. So 4:14, you will pull it up on the screen. Any other questions before we begin as I'm pulling it up? Okay, so let's get started. We're going to start on section 3 of chapter 37. Once again, that's 4:14. Oops. Sorry, guys. Let's just go back to section 3. We'll start again from here. Section 3, elevating your food to God. In addition to the primary involvement of A, you have the body involved, and B, the animal soul in a mitzvah act, we will now turn to the secondary involvement, which is C, the physical energy that powers them. And yet another point is that the energizing animal soul's power invested in the spoken words of Torah study or prayer, etc., or in practical commandments. So when we are involved, the animal soul is involved in studying the Torah and prayer and in actually putting on tefillin and lighting candles and eating kosher, has been completely nourished and sustained by the blood, which is from Klipas Noga itself. This nourishment of the blood being from all the food and drink that you ate and drank, which entered your blood and came under its ruling spiritual force of Klipas Noga and became its source of nourishment, right? Because you took the food and now it's becoming your nourishment. So therefore what happens is the food and drink that gave you energy are an important participant in the mitzvah. Since that energy, oh wait, did I not share the screen? Whoops, sorry about that, guys. Unless it's not shared properly. That should be better. We'll start again from the top. The food and drink that gave you energy are an important participant in the mitzvah. Since that energy was from the powers of Klipas Noga through the blood, it follows that when you do a mitzvah, you elevate that food, klipas noga energy too, as the Tanya will now explain. So just to summarize, when we do a mitzvah, number one, we're elevating our body and our animal soul. And number three, now it's not only within you that you're doing any elevation, but also what's outside of you, the food, the drink, the what you're involving in the mitzvah, that's nourishing you and giving you energy, that now becomes elevated as well. And now that you use this food energy in your blood to do a mitzvah, it's transformed from negative klipas noga to good, and is absorbed into the powers of holiness through the power of the energizing animal soul that made your body move to do the mitzvah. Since that power of your animal soul was nourished by the food in your blood, and then that power of your animal soul, nourished by the food in your blood, immersed itself into those words of Torah study or prayer, or into the mitzvah act, that mitzvah being the actual inner will of God, devoid of any hiding of God's face. And as a result, the energy from the food in your blood, which powered the animal soul to do the mitzvah, becomes absorbed into the blessed infinite light, which is in the mitzvah, since the mitzvah is the will of God. And along with the energy from the food in the blood, which is elevated through the mitzvah, the power of the energizing animal soul, which was used to carry out the mitzvah, is also elevated and absorbed into the infinite, into the blessed infinite light. So the reason why I went a little quick is because we actually studied this last week. So I just wanted to bring us fresh. We're going to continue now with section 4, but just the practical lesson that we have on the sidebar, just to bring this all together, is that when you do a mitzvah, you're elevating our body, we're elevating our soul, now also elevating the food which would nourish you and gave you the energy to now do the mitzvah. Now that food is also elevated into Hashem's light. Section 4. This is really where we're up to today. Whoops. So please join along. Everyone could see, right? Make sure it's clear. Okay, cool. The effects of klipas noga elevation. The effects of all this klipas noga elevation through the body, animal, soul, and the food energy that powered them are cumulative and will eventually result in the entire global force of klipas noga being elevated to God. So it's not just a one-stop, a drive-through, a drive-by, you do a mitzvah and then only that place, but it's cumulative. Our job is to elevate all the klipas noga around us. And just to remind ourselves, to refresh, klipas noga is not inherently bad. That's the 3 impure klipas. Klipas noga is like an apple. It's on its own, it's not holy, but we have that power to elevate it, to redeem it, its quality, and make it holy. Because we nourish ourselves through the coffee or through the apple or through the whatever is in front of us, and utilize that for the sake of Hashem. And through this entire global force of klipas noga will eventually be elevated to, which is the foundational energy of this physical material world. And this global elevation will be complete when every neshama and divine soul in all Israel globally will cause every animal soul to observe all the mitzvahs, thereby elevating the entire structure of klipas noga, as we shall see later in the chapter. So the goal is to elevate the global klipas noga. So when we all do our job, klipas noga is elevated. That will be the time of Mashiach. It's interesting to note, some of you perhaps are familiar that there is a global movement, quoting from the Talmud, that everyone should keep a Shabbos. And like it says in the Talmud, if all Jews would keep one Shabbos, kihilchata, in the proper way, according to halacha, Mashiach would certainly arrive. Because at that moment, the potency elevating all of our places of the world to be in that holy place, it would itself exhaust and bring out the Mashiach to come. So the Tanya now clarifies how many souls we are speaking of. So I think this is more of a parenthetical part, meaning we're trying to say that all souls will be elevating the klipas noga. How many souls are there in the world? So Israel, when we say the word Yisrael, which was a name given to Jacob in last week's Torah portion, it refers to a group of souls, which is divided into 600,000 core units, which are then further subdivided into millions of Jewish souls, which have been spread throughout history. Obviously, there's been millions and millions and millions of souls in the world, but we all come from the same 600,000 units. Those 600,000 units are from when the Jews left Egypt. Those are the core units. And from there, it's subdivided. So that's why you could have one core unit of a soul that then divides into many, many souls, but it's coming from the same root, from the same core of one of those 600,000. So when you say Yisrael, and I just want to Yisrael. It's representing the 600,000 souls. The census of Israelites in the desert after Sinai totaled approximately 600,000 individuals. We know that from chapter 1 of the book of Numbers. According to the Kabbalah, this hints to the mystical reality that God created 600,000 basic soul units within the Jewish people. And each of our souls is a spark from one of these core 600,000 souls. And you could see more about this in the book authored by Rabbi Chaim Vital. Rabbi Chaim Vital was the main student of the Holy Arizal, Rabbi Isaac Luria, one of the fathers of Kabbalah. So the Arizal actually didn't write anything. His student was his scribe and wrote down all of his teacher's Torah. So in the book Shar HaGilgulim, which in English is the gates of a reincarnation in chapter 17, you could see more about the 600,000 core units that are then subdivided into many, many millions of souls. All of these soul units need to observe the Torah in order for Klipas Noga to be elevated on a global level. So meaning I could do my part and you could do your part, but our job is also to make sure that the other soul of that 600,000 is also doing their part. So that's how many souls we are referring to. So the discussion up to this point has centered around making a home for God by observing the 248 positive commandments with the body and animal soul, actively engaging and elevating the world. But how do the 365 negative prohibitions fit into this picture? How do we make a home for God? Through the prohibitions, if they do not demand any action, but rather the cessation of action, which is don't do this. Robin, if I'm not mistaken, a few weeks ago, this was your question, right? Cool. So that makes me very happy that the Alter Rebbe, it makes sense to understand how taking an active role in doing a mitzvah, like giving charity, it makes sense that I'm adding a light, I'm refining my klipas noga, elevating it because I'm doing a positive mitzvah. But by abstaining or holding back from doing a negative thing, which is don't do this, so don't work on Shabbos and don't eat not kosher, what type of elevation am I able to perform? So he answers like this. Each individual soul must observe all 613 mitzvot of the Torah, including the 365 prohibitions, in order to keep the body's 365 major blood vessels where the energizing animal soul is found from being nourished by one of these sins, which would cause them to receive energy from one of the three completely impure klipas. Since it is from the three completely impure klipas that energy flows to the 365 biblical prohibitions and their rabbinic derivatives. Keeping the body free from the completely impure klipas by refraining from the 365 prohibitions and their rabbinic derivative is crucial. So what we know so far is by abstaining, by holding back from doing the 365 prohibitions, what you're accomplishing is that your body is not being nourished by one of those 365 prohibitions. Let's see. Make sure we understand that completely. Once the energizing animal soul in the blood is contaminated by one of the three impure klipas, it can no longer be elevated to God. Since unlike the permitted pleasures of klipas noga, the three completely impure klipas can never be elevated. Rather, they must be eradicated and removed completely. As the verse states, I will remove the spirit of impurity from the earth, indicating that the spirit of complete impurity must be removed. It cannot be elevated. So just to summarize this point, I think it's part of a longer part. So I'm just going to read the Hasidic thought. It doesn't have it in the Kindle edition on the screen, but it does have it on page 417, which is where we are up to. So if you're looking inside on the book, that's great. If not, no worries. You could just listen to me. A Hasidic thought reads like this: refraining from the 365 prohibitions is crucial to keep the body clean from the impure klipas, which would contaminate the system, preventing the body's energy from being elevated to God. So the prohibitions don't actually make a home for God. It's just that violating any one of them impedes the process. So I think that last line really explains it. So we know that the positive mitzvah is actually allowing a home for God. We're elevating the klipas noga, making it a place of holiness that God can now reside, a home for God, which is the central theme. The 365 prohibitions that we abstain from is not actively making a home for God. It's just making sure that that doesn't get filled with a prohibitive place of klipa that would never would not allow it to be elevated. It would impede the process. So by making sure that it's not filled with that impure klipa, those three impure klipas from the 365 prohibitions, it's allowing the process to now elevate through the performance of the mitzvah there. Okay, we'll continue now in the middle of the Kindle. Actually, Lynn asked a good question. Even all the numbered men were 603,550. So there's two parts to this. That's a very good question, Lynn. Number one, you're right. It's actually referring to families. The 600,000 units they're referring to is the families. And the reason why they listed it as 600,000 is because it was people that were, the way they took the census was if they were eligible for battle, for the Jewish army. Now, children under 20 were not eligible for battle. I think now the age is 18 in Israel and in the States, but back then it was 20. You could be drafted only at the age of 20, and you would have to retire by the age of 60. Meaning it was only those 40 years that you were able to be eligible for battle. And also, those were the people that were the culprits of the spies, meaning children under 20 were not punished for the sin of the spies. And the woman actually didn't take any part of it. So it was a 600,000 people that were eligible for battle and also punished for the sin of the spies, which means they had to stay in the desert. But the women and the children at that time who then grew up were able to go into Israel. So that's how they rated. But the other part to your question, Lynn, is what about that extra 3,500, right? The 3,550. If I'm saying is 600,000, it actually comes out to a little more, right? There is an answer to that. I don't remember what it is. I don't remember.
Yeah, so I was just curious whether the 600,000 was each individual or it was seen as units. So
right, got it. So and the Kabbalistically, so in Kabbalah there's 600,000 soul core units, aside for what we see from the Exodus of Egypt in the book of Numbers. But we see that parallel of the 600,000 core units coming out as we left Egypt, but it doesn't mean that it matched up exactly. Okay, interesting. Let's continue. I told you it's a long chapter, so we're gonna make our way through it. And this might be one of the longest chapters. Does anyone have any insight on that? I don't remember any chapter before going all the way through section 8 in a chapter. So
well,
I'm going out on a limb.
I do have a question. Can you
Sure.
repeat the three things in the negative that to extend
Klipa.
the negative klipa? Yeah, the three. Could you
Yeah.
repeat that,
I
please?
don't know if there's actually names to it. Like what you're saying, could I identify what they are? I don't think they're ever given names. It's always known as the 3 impure klipas. There's a 3 impure klipas, and then there's klipas noga, which is more the klipa that could be the bright klipa, literally, which means it could be elevated. But if I'm not mistaken, Lynn, I don't think anywhere does it actually say a name of what the three klipas are. It's just the 365 negative prohibitions of the Torah are from those three impure klipas. What the categories are, I don't think it ever states that. At least I haven't seen it. Certainly not in the Tanya, and I don't think anywhere else either. So we have three impure klipas. We've got the klipas noga. We got the kedusha, which is the holiness. And our job is to elevate the klipas noga of the world into holiness. And by doing that, we, on a cosmic level, all the souls fulfilling all those mitzvahs and elevating those sparks, and klipas noga, that does a global elevation. And to address Robin's question from a few weeks ago, the Alter Rebbe over here says the 365 negative prohibitions are making sure that we don't get filled with those negative parts that impedes the process. It allows it to be filled with the parts that could be elevated, the klipas noga. We're still in the middle of 417, I think. Yeah, we're towards the bottom of 417 or the middle of the Kindle. And in addition to refraining from the prohibitions, every soul must also observe the 248 positive mitzvahs, which have the spiritual effect of pulling the blessed infinite light downwards into this world. And they also have the effect of elevating the person, connecting and merging the whole structure of the energizing animal soul found in the 248 limbs of the body to merge completely with the blessed infinite light. So there's a dual process happening. When we do that mitzvah, we're drawing down the godly energy into the world, and we're also elevating the person, connecting it to the infinite light of God by preventing the completely impure klipas from entering the body through refraining from the 365 prohibitions. There is then no obstacle to elevating the body to God by means of the 248 positive mitzvahs. And now, even when this is achieved, even the animal soul becomes literally one with God. This is the punchline, I think, that the soul on its own doesn't need elevation. The point of the mitzvahs is to elevate the animal soul. And at that point, the animal soul becomes one with God, thereby fulfilling the will which arose in God's mind before creation, that he should have a home in the lowest realms, which have now become a chariot like the patriarchs. So just this last point is beautiful. We know that the patriarchs, who were Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, they were absolute chariots to God. Chariot just follows the will of the rider. A chariot doesn't have any say on their own. Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov were on such a high level of surrender and bittul to God that they just fulfilled what God wanted. They didn't have any will outside of God. It was fully God's will. So when we are now in the state in sync with elevating our God, with elevating our animal soul, we take on that chariot-like figure, that we are now in sync with God's will, because the animal soul was the competition. The animal soul was impeding us. But when we are infusing our life with the positive mitzvahs and abstaining from the negative mitzvahs, what happens then is our animal soul is joining the process. It's joining the party. And at that point, we are bittul. We have that, we're in sync with what God wants. So now we can understand the Tanya statement above, that the klipas noga will be elevated to God globally when every individual soul will observe the 613 mitzvahs. Let's see that inside. When the whole structure of the energizing animal soul in all of Israel will become a chariot to God, then the whole energy structure of this world, which is currently from klipas noga, will leave its impurity and filth, which is a quote from the prophets, and be elevated to holiness, becoming a chariot to God. This is, I'm getting so excited reading this because this is the mission statement of Chabad. This is it. Like, this is what it's all about. That our job is to do the mitzvahs. We have a shmutz in the world. There is a darkness in the world. There is a hate in the world. But it's not, of course, we have to vote and do all that stuff to make sure we're going to do it. But there's always going to be more shmutz. It's almost like it's like going over and over in a cycle, there's going to be more things coming up. You want to really get rid of any shmutz, any darkness, it's about doing the mitzvahs, because then there's the klipa is being rid of, the filth and impurity is abolished, everything is elevated to Hashem. And this will be in the Messianic era, when his glory will be revealed and all flesh will see together that God is speaking. When Mashiach comes, this is what we'll have. We'll be open godliness. That's what our whole mind and our eyes will be able to see and understand. It's like our little children, they're trained that encourage others to do a mitzvah. Don't force them, of course, but like the satisfaction we have when we help someone shake a lulav or give candles on Friday to someone, the joy is obviously satisfaction that someone did a mitzvah. The satisfaction that the mitzvah itself is the reward, that itself leads to another mitzvah and it elevates the world, but also because it'll bring about the time of Mashiach. So, and I've shared this before, and unfortunately, many times I visit people in the hospital and, or I get a text, could you please pray for this person or that person? Like the response is, of course, prayer, but then you follow it up with a mitzvah, because the mitzvah is really that process of elevating part of the world that will bring about the time of Mashiach. And when Mashiach comes, there will be no more illness, there will be no more impurity, there will be no more filth. So our job is to bring Mashiach, and then all of this will go away. To the point where every time we're at the Torah and we pray for someone, what do we say? The words right after the name is that in their merit, charity will be given. When we do a memorial prayer for someone who passed at the funeral or on the yahrzeit, the words right after the name is, or by Yizkor on the holiday, we right away say that without a vow, we will give charity in their behalf, in their merit. Because when you follow it up with a mitzvah, that allows the kedusha to rise, that allows the impurity to be voided, and for it to be elevated to holiness. So ultimately, this will be when Mashiach comes. And I'm just like 8 lines from the bottom over here, and he will shine forth over them with the majesty of his triumphant strength, which is what we read in the Amidah of the High Holidays. And now from the Torah, it says, and the glory of God will fill all the earth. And Israel, this is a beautiful verse, shall see God eye to eye, ayin ba'ayin. Like at the giving of the Torah, of which the verse states, you are shown to know that the God is God. There is none besides him. With the emphasis here on being shown God's presence, and see above chapter 36. Just the point is that we will be able to see it, because when Mashiach comes, the holiness will be filling the earth. It will be something we could see, because Kedusha will be the norm when Mashiach comes. Klipas Noga then is destined to be elevated in its entirety to God. But what will become of the 3 impure klipas that cannot be elevated? So Klipas Noga, we know the animal soul, the body, and the nourishing energy of the food and things around us. All Klipas Noga will be elevated. But what about the 3 impure klipas? And as a direct result of this global elevation of the fundamental structure of the klipas noga, the 3 completely impure klipas will be entirely consumed and eradicated, because currently their nourishment and sustenance comes from the realm of holiness via klipas noga, which acts as an intermediary between them. Therefore, when klipas noga will be eradicated, the 3 completely impure klipas will automatically lose their source of sustenance and be eradicated too. Just to summarize this point, it's a really beautiful point. Right now, where does klipa receive its energy? It can't stand alone. It has to receive its energy from a place of holiness. But holiness doesn't want to give it. So the klipa gets it via the klipas noga. The 3 impure klipas are sustained through klipas noga, receiving it from holiness. It then downgrades it, it gives it to the 3 impure klipas. But once klipas noga will now be elevated to kedusha, which will happen in its entirety with the coming of Mashiach, the three impure klipas lose its source of nourishment because there's no more klipas noga. It all got elevated. You know what it means? That when Mashiach comes, what we will see, right now, when we look at world, it's all klipas noga. We see a physical structure. We see a table. We see a beam. But when Mashiach comes, the truth of that beam will come out. We will see the kedusha, eye to eye. We will see it like we just quoted the verse. Everything will see its truth. The genuine authenticity in its entirety will be revealed. Like it says, when Mashiach comes, even like if you would try to pick an apple off the tree on Shabbos, which is forbidden, the tree will yell at you and saying, "What are you doing?" Because the tree will have that energy of kedusha giving it energy. It's not anymore coming from a place of klipas noga, because the entire klipas noga will be elevated. So, which means, in other words, that the three impure klipas will lose its source of energy, and therefore it will cease to exist. It will be eradicated, which is actually the verse we say, we quoted it on the previous paragraph, at every funeral. We say, Es ruach hatuma avir min haaretz, that the spirit of impurity will totally be abolished, will be removed from the face of the earth, because it doesn't have its source of energy anymore. It's cut off from its source. So klipa will be eradicated. What an incredible time. There will be no more klipa in the world. All right, let's continue. Section 5. Okay, good. We're covering some ground. Why your body is so important. It follows then that the ultimate goal of the Messianic era of Mashiach and the revival of the dead, known in Hebrew as Tchias HaMesim, namely the disclosure of divine glory and godliness, and to remove the spirit of impurity from the earth, depends on A, pulling godliness and the blessed infinite light into the energizing animal souls of all Israel, in all their 248 limbs, through the observance of all 248 mitzvahs. Don't worry, I'm going to summarize this paragraph in a moment. And B, to remove the spirit of impurity from the energizing animal souls of all Israel, through refraining from all 365 prohibitions, so that the 365 major blood vessels are not nourished from the completely impure klipas. So just to summarize this, hold on. This is what he's calling section 5, right? Yeah. Just making sure it matches up in the book. Hold on one second. Okay, I think it's just looking at later on 423, it lists again section 5, but under a different title. I'm assuming that's supposed to be section 6. So yeah, I think we're on the right section 5. Why? I'm actually, if whoever has a book, could you just go ahead to 423 and tell me if it says section 5 there or section 6?
Section 6.
Oh, okay. So I maybe have an older print. On mine, it says section 5. Okay.
That's what I have. Section 5 is on 419. And then it's again on 423. And then there's section 6 on 425.
Oh, got it. Okay. So maybe Cheryl just has a more updated print than ours. Okay.
Both in the print that I have, there are 2 section 5s.
Oh, okay, so that's what we have.
That's what I just said, yeah.
Okay, awesome. Okay, hold on. I think I missed a Hasidic thought on 418. So I'm just going to read that. Sorry for skipping that. The readers of the Tanya have now been comforted further for their predicament of constantly struggling to battle in vain with the impulse to evil, unable to prevail over it. Ultimately, we are taught here, it is the practical commandments performed in speech and action that elevate the world and directly cause all the elevations of the Messianic era. These activities are within the full control of all of us to do these activities. And that is a comfort for the Beinoni. Okay, so what we're saying here, that the goal of Mashiach and Tchias HaMesim, the revival of the dead, is how do we get there? By bringing infinite light into our animal soul and removing the impurity, the klipa, to be not nourished from klipas noga, which means we abstain from all 365 klipas. So I think that was pretty standard of what we've learned. Okay, so let's continue. Okay, on the Kindle it's towards the top of the page, because the overall structure of the souls of Israel, which consists of 600,000 core soul units, represents the foundational spiritual energy of the whole world, which was created for their sake. And each individual core soul is designated and contains the energy of 1/600,000th part of the world, the whole physical world. And the elevation of that portion of the world to which a soul has been designated is dependent on that energizing soul's elevation to God. So if I'm understanding this correctly, this is a pretty novel idea. You have 600,000 souls. The whole world was created for these souls to do their job, and they're in their portion of the world. So each one of these 600,000 souls has a part of the physical world that they have to elevate. And it's up to that soul to elevate it. And this elevation of your specific portion of the world takes place when you use this physical world to help your body and energizing animal soul worship God, such as eating and drinking, etc., as well as using your home and all its equipment. The Tanya now clarifies how the millions of actual souls arise from the basic 600,000 roots. Only there are, of course, more than 600,000 souls, since the 600,000 soul units are basic soul roots, and each soul root is subdivided into a further 600,000 soul sparks, each spark being a single soul. And the same is true with the other parts of the soul, nefesh and ruach, which are also subdivided into further 600,000 soul sparks. And the same subdivision exists in each world throughout each of the four worlds, Atzilus, Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya. So this is more parenthetical, just explaining that you have 600,000 soul core units. And from there, it's subdivided to another 600,000. And then it's subdivided into the three different layers of the soul, which is Nefesh, Ruach, and Neshama. And then it's subdivided into each of the four spiritual worlds. So that's how you can get to many, many millions of souls. We now return to the theme of comfort of our lifelong task of struggling to observe the practical mitzvahs. And each soul spark came down to the world, not for its own sake, because like we said before, the soul on its own is holy and pure and perfect, but rather it's to influence the animal soul and body, as we shall see. Before elaborating on this point, the Tanya notes parenthetically that for the soul to come into this world represented a very great downgrade. So this is just a beautiful teaching, seeing how far the soul had to come, downgrading itself into this world. And coming into this world is a very great downgrade for the soul, a real experience of exile. For even if the soul-body combination were to become a complete tzaddik, worshiping God with reverence and great and pleasurable love, right, ahava and yira, still the soul wouldn't reach the same level of emotive connection to God, the love and fear that it experienced before coming down to this material world. Neither a part of it, nor a fraction of it, which is a quote from the Talmud. There is simply no similarity or comparison at all between these two states, as every intelligent person realizes that the body can't contain the same level of emotive connection to God as a soul in heaven. So if the soul has nothing to gain from the exile of coming down into the body, then what is the point of this downgrade? Just to elaborate a little bit more, we in the career path that I've chosen, we comfort people often for losing a loved one, often, God forbid, tragically, suddenly, And it's a very hard process. We all know that. One of the comforts that I've seen, and obviously it has to be done, nothing is blanket in terms of this works. So it depends on the family, it depends on the day. But often when a person passes away and it's a long process until they pass, they want to know that the neshama is okay. The soul is comforted. The soul is in a better place, which according to Kabbalah and the Jewish teachings, it is that way. But furthermore, just a point that we get from here is that there's a certain limitation of the emotions and the intelligence that the soul has when it's in our body, because it has a physical brain that's limiting the capacity of the mind to think, the soul's mind to think. And there's a heart that limits the capacity of the feelings to be expressed. But when the soul parts from the body, those limitations are removed. So then the emotions are stronger, are raw. The same as with our intelligence, it's stronger. So what we're saying here, we know, this is the point he's trying to bring out. He's not talking about comforting a person who has passed. I'm just bringing that out parenthetically. But what he's bringing out over here is that we know that the soul, before it comes into this world, was on a much higher level. Its emotions, feelings, its intelligence is in a much stronger, higher capacity. So then why would it come down into this world? It's an absolute downgrade. It's in a state of exile. It's feeling trapped in its body. The soul can't soar and can't express itself as it once was able to do. So by the way, just the comfort I give to people is now you could connect to a loved one who has parted, while not on a physical level, but their emotions are raw. Their emotions are strong. And they could feel what you're doing. And they could feel it now more than they were able to feel it while in this world. Just to bring out some questions. Can you explain how we are comforted again? So just going back, are we talking, I don't know if you mean for the Beinoni to be comforted in Tanya, or for the person to be comforted for a loved one that has passed? But I'm going to guess you're talking about the Beinoni's comfort. Yeah, the Beinoni's comfort is that what you mean, Shira? The Beinoni's comfort? Yeah, got it. So the Beinoni's comfort is he's feeling, I'm in a rat race of life. I can never be a tzaddik. I'm always going to be in the struggle. What's the point of it all? I want to know that at some point I attain a level of tzaddik. And the comfort we're saying is the whole point of why we are here is to do what you are given the task to do, the task of the Beinoni, which is to achieve behavioral perfection, that our action and our speech is actually the whole point of why we're here, because that's how we elevate our part of the world, our klipas noga, and ultimately bring God home here. So our point is not to elevate ourselves there. That's part of the process, but the point is to bring it down here. The Beinoni's job is to do just that, which is absolutely the whole purpose of why we are here. So the comfort to the Beinoni is knowing that you're actually given the task to do what God wants from everyone, which is to bring a home for God here. And that is what the Beinoni is tasked with, doing his behavioral perfection, which we do with our speech and our action. And the 5 levels of the soul, which you're quoting, Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chaya, and Yechida, that's exactly right. Each one correspond to a different part of us. So the Nefesh, which is the lowest part of the soul, is more the biological part of us, which is, by the way, the part of the soul that remains by the grave. And that's why it's absolutely important. One of the reasons of being buried, because the Nefesh remains there. So that we put a marker there, and when we visit the grave, it actually, the Nefesh speaks to the Ruach, and which speaks to the Neshama and the higher up levels of the soul, and brings all of it to intercede on your behalf. But the Nefesh remains by the grave. So when you visit the grave, there's a triggering energy that you do to the rest of the soul. And Yechida being the highest, like exactly like you said. When someone passes, the soul is in a better place because it is returned to the divine. The peace of God is returned. Awesome. Okay, let's see. Let me just see if we can get to. Let's just finish this part over here. So just to answer the question is, this is such a downgrade for the soul. We're in exile. Rather, we're in the middle of the Kindle page. The soul's downgrade, as it is invested into a body and energizing animal soul, is only for the purpose of fixing the body and animal soul, and not for the soul's own sake. Right? The soul itself doesn't need to come into this world. Rather, the whole purpose is for the animal soul. Namely, A, to keep the body and animal soul away from the negative powers of the three completely impure klipas, through observing the 365 Torah prohibitions and their rabbinic derivatives. And B, to elevate the energizing animal soul, along with the unique portion of the world at large, which has been designated to that soul, to connect and merge the animal soul world with the blessed infinite light, which is pulled upon the animal soul and world through observing the 248 positive mitzvahs, with the energizing animal soul, which, as mentioned above, is the active force that powers the observance of the practical commandments. And just to wrap this up, the Tanya now cites a source in the teachings of Rabbi Isaac Luria, the Arizal, for this conclusion that the soul only comes down to elevate the body and not for its own sake. As stated in Eitz Chaim in chapter 26, that the soul itself does not require fixing at all and was forced into this world, into the body and animal soul, only to pull light upon them to fix them in a way that is directly comparable to the secret of the Shekhinah's exile, which is for the sake of elevating sparks that have fallen. So just like the point of the Shekhinah being exiled into the world, God's divine light, is only to elevate the sparks, the point of why our neshama was schlepped down into the world was also to elevate the energizing, to elevate the animal soul, and the klipas noga, which is the energizing of the animal soul. The soul resembles the Shekhinah divine presence in that A, it did not come down into this world for its own sake, but rather B, for the sake of elevating the physical world with which it becomes enmeshed. So just like the Shekhinah comes down not for its own sake, but to elevate the world, and it didn't come down willingly, the soul also, it has no care to be in this world originally. That's why there's pain of labor, it's the pain of the body, but it's the pain of the baby kicking, but it's the pain of the neshama saying, get me out of here. I don't want this. And the first sound of every child is a cry. It's a cry of the neshama saying, what am I doing here? I'm in a place of exile. I feel trapped. But ultimately, the soul realizes that its purpose here is to elevate the animal soul, to elevate the klipas noga. And by doing that, we bring about the state of Mashiach, fulfilling its purpose, the soul's purpose, and elevating even the soul to a place that on its own it couldn't achieve. Okay, everyone have a wonderful Thanksgiving, a happy Hanukkah coming up. We have a lot to be thankful for, which is really what Hanukkah is about. As we say in the prayer in the Amidah, we say lahodot ulahalel, to give praise and to thank God for this miracle of Hanukkah. So with that, we'll wish everyone a happy Hanukkah. If you're local and you need candles or a menorah, please don't hesitate to reach out. Also, thanks to Nancy, we have turkeys that we've been distributing to people that wouldn't have turkeys. So if you know of someone that would appreciate having a lovely and feast for Thanksgiving, just send them to our Chabad, and we have meals for them. And all right. Awesome, everyone. Oh, next week, Wednesday, we will have Tanya class in the morning. And in the evening, God willing, we will have a Hanukkah party right here at Chabad. It will be launching a Jewish community band of our Hebrew school parents that are playing guitar and clarinet and violin. It should be a really beautiful band. That will be next Wednesday evening at 6 p.m. You could sign up online. And of course, the menorah, we're having a drone flying menorah over City Hall on Sunday, December 5th. That will be in the evening at 4 o'clock. And if you have any kids, we have an olive press workshop on Sunday morning, teaching them about Hanukkah together with an olive press. All right, we got a lot going on for Hanukkah, everyone. Happy Hanukkah. Have a great day and a happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you,
Shalom,
Rabbi.
everyone.